Alright, Unit 2. So this is the first area study in Unit 2. So how can motion be described and explained? So it's all about movement stuff. And there's the chapters 8 to 12 in the textbook, your textbook. And so there's quite a few lessons here. It's broken down a fair bit. Alright, so there's some of the lessons pretty short, like this one, for example. Alright, so the first thing we need to look at is a new idea, things called vectors and scalars. So, first of all, scalars. So, what is a scalar? Scalar is a quantity that has only a size. Oops, that's not how you spell size. Right, it only has a size. Now that's in your notes, that's the missing bit. So things that only have sizes like, distance, temperature, mass, time. So all of those things have just a size. Vectors, on the other hand, they have a size, but they also have a direction as well. So for things like scalars, if you put a if you put a direction on there, it doesn't make sense. So like temperature, 15 degrees Celsius. So if you say 15 degrees Celsius west, like that makes no sense. The west doesn't make sense. But vectors, so vectors, for example, have, and it's in your notes, missing in your notes, they have both a size and direction. Alright, so scalar has just a size, whereas a vector has a size and a direction. So there's a few examples in your book there. So velocity, for example, is a vector. It's one of the examples in there, and so 3 meters per second west. Alright, now that makes sense. The 3 meters per second tells us the how fast bit, and the west gives us more information because it tells us we're going 3 meters per second but in the direction of west. So that gives us more information. Alright, so if we want to distinguish between just an F and a vector that's F, there's a couple of ways to do it. Now, often in your textbooks and things like that, they'll have bold or F with an arrow on top of it. So both of these things here, whether it's bold or whether it's got an arrow, means it's a vector. Alright, whereas something which might be just a little f like that, for example, would more than likely be a scalar, unless you were told otherwise. Alright, how do we represent a vector? Well, we represent by an arrow. So if we're drawing them, we draw an arrow. So it's vector, so that's vector A. Oh, actually, I've forgotten another one. Sometimes you get a little squiggle. That's not a very good squiggle. Sometimes you'll see a squiggle. So when I learnt, that's how I had the squiggle. So if you see, mostly now you have the arrow, but sometimes you'll see, particularly if I'm sometimes writing it, you see a squiggle. Because that's when I learnt how to do it, that's what I did. And sometimes that squiggle is underneath. Alright, so I'll try and stick to the arrow, but you're not always guaranteed. Alright, so here's vector B. For example, now those two vectors, they're pointing in different directions and they're different sizes. So that indicates both the direction and how big they are. So vector A, of course, is bigger. The size of it's bigger. Alright, so your notes mention that about that. Alright, so how do we describe? Alright, here's a diagram there, and it says describe the direction of the vector shown in the diagram. Alright, so that blue vector there, so we've got a bit of information. The information that we've got here is, well, we've got our north, south, east and west, and then we've got showing there an angle here. It's 60 degrees. Now, in physics, we tend just to use the north, south, east and west. So we go at south. So first of all, facing south, turn 60 degrees to the east. Now we don't have to write too much, so we go south 60 degrees to the east. Alright, so more often than not in physics, that's all what we use. Of course, in maths as well, you would have a true bearing option, which is clockwise from north, and so that would be 120 degrees true. But most of the time in physics, we're just going to use this here in terms of where the compass bearings are. Alright, so as I said at the start, there's a few of these lessons, some of them pretty short, and this is one of the short ones. So now there's some, on page 263, there's some questions about the stuff I've just covered. There's also, there's a video in there about vectors, which goes into addition and subtraction as well, which is the next couple of lessons. Anything you're not sure of, give me a yell.